I'm often asked the question, how can I know which way to go? Which is a simplified version of the question. The question is typically asked in different ways, but it's based on the same topic of life direction. You see, there's often a stage or a point in our lives where we have to make, we feel, a decision in terms of where we have to go next. This point or stage in our life can feel like there's a big change on the horizon. And what I've noticed from my experience with this stage or this point in life that can happen at many different times throughout life is that within myself, which used to be the case, and within clients that I've worked with, we often create an inner crossroads. What does that mean? So typically, when we're at this point, it can be difficult. And it can be difficult because we think there's so many different ways which we can go. And the reason why we think there's so many different routes is because we have created internally, psychologically, many potential paths. And how we have created these paths is, for example, fear is saying, I think we should go that way. Or thought is saying, I think we should go this way. Or logic is saying, I think we should go that way. So that's why I call it an inner crossroads. It seems like we can take different routes. And so it becomes confusing to us. And a lot of the time, this is difficult for people because they think they need to make a decision. But ultimately, what needs to be done in these moments is we need to remember it's more about listening and less about figuring out. There's a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, which I really like, and it says, "For one with a clear mind, there is only one way." What does that mean? Well, you see, each of us has intuition inside of us. We have intelligence from the body, which is instinct. We have intelligence of the mind, which is intellect. And we also have intelligence of our being, of consciousness, of awareness, which is intuition. And intuition is that voice coming from our heart telling us where to go. And you see, with intuition, it's typically only pointing in one direction. It's not trying to confuse us and pointing to many different routes. No, it's usually pointing one way. So that's why I say, when we feel like there's an inner crossroads, or we can take many different routes, step back and listen to what your heart is saying. listen to what feels right to you in that moment. And this can be partly difficult as well, because at times intuition is telling us this is right for me, but maybe there's others in our lives that don't agree with that. And that's okay, that can happen. But that's part of the difficulty of listening to intuition. And you see, because intuition is not coming from the intellect of the mind, but instead the intuition of our being, it can at times not make sense to the mind. I often say intuition is pointing towards a foggy path. And I say a foggy path because we often can't see what's at the end of it. It's unclear. And that's another difficulty, if you will, about following intuition. Because when we continuously follow intuition, we're not following a path that's been taken before. Intuition arises within us spontaneously in the moment, from our heart, to our unique vessel, which is this body. And it's creating a new trail. So you're going to be walking a unique way. Another difficulty people have in terms of listening to intuition is telling the difference between emotion and intuition. You see, emotion is a bodily feeling, whereas intuition is different. Intuition is a recognition. Typically, with intuition, there's something external, and internally, our intuition says, that's right for us. That's for me. That's the right way. You just recognize it. And again, it might not make sense to the mind, this recognition. But it's important to remember you can trust your intuition. And you could, for example, start practicing listening to intuition, to your heart, in everyday life with little things. For example, just listening to your heart in terms of what you want to do this evening. Maybe the mind wants to do one thing and your heart wants to do another, and your instinct wants to do another thing. But I think when we live authentically to ourselves and we follow our own path, that doesn't mean we necessarily have to neglect and ignore intellect and instinct because of intuition. I think in a balanced life, we can use each of them in proportion because they're all helpful. But with intuition, again, it's something that feels right to us. And emotion is something temporary. It comes and it goes, but a recognition will always be there. So that's why the Buddha said we shouldn't make decisions, permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. And on the topic of Buddhism, there's a Zen Buddhist story about a Zen monk and his gardener. The Zen monk had bought flower pots for the gardener to hang up on his property. He brought the flower pots to the gardener to hang up, and he brought the gardener and the pots to a wall where he could place them. And the gardener picked up the flower pots, and he was asking the Zen monk, okay, where would you like them? And the Zen monk was looking, and he was like, no, not there. No, not there. And then eventually, after moving it around quite a bit, the gardener put it against a particular location, and the Zen monk said, yes, there, that's where I want it. And the gardener thought this was unusual, how he wanted it in this particular point. He couldn't understand it. And the Zen monk left, and the gardener then marked where the monk wanted the flower pot. He put the flower pot down, and then he proceeded to follow the monk and chase him and ask him, "Pardon me, I've forgotten where you wanted that pot. Would you mind showing me again the location?" So the monk went back with him. And again, the gardener picked up the pot and he moved it around. "Do you want it here? No, not there. Do you want it there? No, not there." Until eventually the monk got back to the exact same spot. And that's where the gardener hung it up. And in essence, I think this helps better illustrate how intuition is something that feels right to us, the same way that particular location felt right to the Zen monk. For me, I think there's two things that are required in order for us to better listen to and follow intuition. The first would be consciousness. You see, consciousness helps us see clearly, and it also helps us navigate calmly. And then the second, I would say, is courage. See, again, we need courage when we're listening to intuition. As I've previously explained, we're going to be walking where no one's walked before. And that will take some courage. There will be at times, again, where there might be internal conflict, where fear is saying, "Don't go down there. We don't know what's at the end of the tunnel." And at times this can be natural. Fear is a perfectly natural thing and it has its place. But as Osho once said, courage does not mean fearlessness. Courage means going into the unknown in spite of all fears.